The history of the Kingdom of Naples in the latter half of the 15th century was a saga of dynastic ambition, deep-seated feudalism, and chilling political calculation, all centered on the figure of King Ferdinand I of Naples, more often and ominously referred to as Ferrante d'Aragona, 1423-1494. His very existence on the throne was a testament to his father's conquest, Alfonso III of Aragon, who had secured the kingdom, making Ferdinand an Aragonese monarch ruling a fiercely Italian and often rebellious populace. His crown, inherited from a conqueror, never sat easily. It was perpetually challenged by the rival claims of the French Angevin dynasty, a claim that served as a rallying cry for every disaffected element within the realm. The deepest threat to Ferdinand's stability came not from across the seas, however, but from within the towering walls and ancient strongholds of his own aristocracy. The Neapolitan nobility, an assemblage of immensely powerful landed magnates like the Sanseverino, Caracciolo, Gesualdo, and Coppola families, were the true masters of their territories. They viewed the king's attempts at royal centralization as an existential threat to their traditional, hereditary feudal privileges. For them, the Aragonese court represented an unwelcome imposition on their historic local autonomy, which they fiercely protected, longing for the decentralized power structures that had allowed them to operate as sovereign princes within their own vast domains. This perpetual tension, this undeclared war between the crown and the feudal power, defined Ferdinand's reign, forcing him into a continuous, exhausting cycle of political maneuvering and military suppression. The culmination of this struggle arrived with the devastating conspiracy of the barons, which erupted between 1485 and 1486. This was not a minor cabal. It was a vast, coordinated military and political revolt, encompassing the most influential noble families whose combined might posed a genuine threat to dissolve the kingdom. Their objective was unambiguous: to violently depose Ferdinand and install a claimant from the French House of Anjou, effectively reversing the Aragonese triumph and restoring the barons' near-absolute independence. The international context of the revolt amplified its danger. The rebellion was secretly, but actively, fostered and supported by Pope Innocent VIII, who harbored profound political grievances against Ferdinand over control of territories and issues concerning papal authority in southern Italy. The king found himself facing not just a civil war, but a spiritual and geopolitical crisis, with the leader of the Western Church actively plotting his downfall. Yet Ferdinand, a monarch whose political philosophy was a brutal precursor to Machiavelli's prince, proved his mettle. He was known for his cold resolve and administrative genius, possessing a ruthless efficiency that allowed him to strike at his enemies both on the battlefield and in the shadowy halls of diplomacy. He responded with a campaign of strategic intensity, mixing decisive military action against the rebel strongholds with pragmatic, cunning negotiation aimed at sowing distrust and fracturing the tenuous baronial alliance. By 1486, through sheer will and strategic ruthlessness, the armed rebellion had been militarily suppressed, its structure broken, and its immediate danger averted. However, the war was not truly over for Ferdinand. The defeat of the barons on the battlefield only initiated the second, more terrifying phase of his vengeance. For a ruler obsessed with the complete and utter consolidation of power, the rebellion represented not just a threat, but a profound and personal betrayal that could only be answered with eradication. To secure his dynasty for good, the feudal power structure had to be decapitated, and the rebellious nobles had to be lured to their final fate. Ferdinand executed this final, fatal act with a calculated deceit that became legendary. He publicly embraced the mantle of the merciful sovereign, issuing a lavish promise of pardon to all the defeated barons, proclaiming his earnest desire to restore lasting peace and unity to his fragmented kingdom. This was the critical lure, a necessary piece of theater to calm fears and project an image of magnanimity that was utterly false. The trap was sprung at the Castel Nuovo, the grand royal fortress of Naples. Invitations were dispatched for a grand reconciliation banquet, a feast of peace to mark the official end of the rebellion. The scene of the impending treachery was meticulously documented by contemporary writers, including the acute observations of the court humanist Giovanni Pontano, and later synthesized by historians like Camillo Porzio in his detailed study La congiura dei baroni del Regno di Napoli. These accounts describe how the king personally received the arriving nobles, assuring them with every theatrical gesture of his clemency and renewed trust. The barons, exhausted by war and perhaps foolishly relieved, allowed themselves to believe the political expediency of forgiveness. The feast began in the Great Hall, a scene of forced conviviality, fine wine, and opulent food, designed to lull the distinguished guests into a false sense of security. The moment of irreversible crisis arrived at the height of the meal. As the powerful nobles were seated, their attention on the feast, the atmosphere of celebration was brutally and instantly extinguished. The doors of the banquet hall were simultaneously and decisively locked. Before any of the nobles could rise or draw a weapon, the pre-positioned royal guards flooded the hall, surrounding the stunned and helpless assembly. The feast was nothing but an elaborate ruse for the arrest, the single defining act of the bloody Banquet of Naples. The barons were seized on the spot. The event's horrifying power lies in this perfect juxtaposition of hospitality and treachery. While some romantic or sensationalized legends claim the nobles were killed at the table, historical evidence confirms the feast was the spectacular trap. The executions followed shortly thereafter. The king ensured that the justice, or rather the vengeance, was swift. The leading conspirators, including former high officials like Antonello Petrucci and Francesco Coppola, were subjected to summary proceedings and were among the first to face execution. Other nobles were consigned to the infamous dungeons of the Castel Nuovo, where they either perished in darkness or were later brought out for public display and death. But Ferdinand's cruelty was marked by a bizarre psychological edge. Chroniclers recorded the chilling detail that the king allegedly had the embalmed bodies of certain executed nobles preserved and even kept on display in the castle's subterranean chambers. This was far beyond conventional punishment. It was an act of deliberate psychological warfare and a permanent, macabre warning to any surviving nobleman, demonstrating with gruesome permanence the unforgiving nature of the Aragonese state. The fallout of this calculated act of state terror was immediate and profound, securing Ferdinand's legacy and his kingdom. By eliminating the most powerful, disruptive elements of the aristocracy in one fell swoop, the feudal power that had paralyzed the crown for centuries was decisively broken. The event led to the comprehensive and irreversible consolidation of the absolute authority of the Aragonese monarchy across southern Italy, marking a true turning point in the centralization of Neapolitan power. The moral ambiguity of the act ensured its place in history. Renaissance writers were sharply divided. One faction lauded Ferdinand as a cunning and just ruler who ruthlessly secured the state from treason, a viewpoint reflecting the era's appreciation for brutal political effectiveness. The opposing faction condemned him as a cruel despot who violated the sacred norms of hospitality and betrayed his royal word. This moral fissure ensured the story was quickly weaponized in the ongoing propaganda wars between the Aragonese and their Angevin enemies. Modern historical analysis conducted by scholars like Francesco Guicciardini, Jacob Burckhardt, Benedetto Croce, and Giuseppe Galasso views the event not as a moral fable, but as a stark, quintessential example of Renaissance political cynicism, a ruthless, calculated move to achieve paramount sovereignty. The story of the Neapolitan bloody banquet transformed into enduring legend, symbolizing the dark, pragmatic heart of Renaissance governance, and it continues to haunt the history and the physical structure of the Castel Nuovo, a chilling reminder of the cold cost of political power.